Welcome to this video on the various organizations of ghost hunters from the tabletop role-playing game Wraith the Oblivion. Wraiths have the dubious distinction of being the group of supernaturals with the most attention on them comparative to any other, despite the restrictions of the dictum mortem prohibiting contact between the living and the dead. Yet the hunt for ghosts is not solely for their extermination. People have turned to ghosts for centuries for their aid, for their patronage, for their knowledge, and sometimes even for their forgiveness. But without further ado, here is a selection of ghost hunting organizations from Wraith the Oblivion. The Sons of Tertullian are an organization of ostensibly Christian ghost hunters and exorcists who take their sanction from the works of the early church father, Tertullian, who wrote in De Anima, or On the Soul, that only God has the power to raise the dead, and therefore anything presenting itself as one of the departed must be a demon, masquerading as a person who has gone on to heaven or hell, as their deeds merit. This logic follows that anyone who claims to speak to the dead is actually summoning demons, and anyone haunted by a ghost must be possessed by a demon. The next logical step they take is that the soul is infinite, and may either enter heaven or hell, but the flesh is finite, and destined to return to the earth anyway. Therefore, harm inflicted upon mere transitory flesh is a small price to pay for the salvation of the immortal soul. This translates to exorcism of the flesh, which often appears to the faithless as torture of the unfortunate person who is possessed, until the demon, or ghost, leaves their body. Many of the Sons' exorcisms end in the death of the person who falls into their hands. Those persons are usually psychics, mediums, channelers, or the insane. The Sons of Tertullian are technically an order within the Society of Leopold. However, they are so insular and secretive that few inquisitors have occasion to deal with them. For their part, the Sons restrict themselves to their unique mission, unconcerned with vampires, werewolves, or witches who do not deal with the dead or in necromancy. The Sons draw their recruits exclusively from those who possess true faith. A candidate for the Sons of Tertullian must be physically fit, scholarly, and above all, loyal. Sons in training are called waiting sons. They have been initiated, but must have 12 years of experience before they are permitted to become full sons and hold the first rank. Sons in waiting are sorted into two groups: the Apostles of St. Gabriel, which are trained as scouts and warriors for the Sons. The other group, the thrice blessed mendicants, focus on scholarship and exorcism. The first rank of the full Sons, known as Scouts in the Holy Army of the Blessed Archangel Gabriel, are assigned to low-risk tasks such as filing field reports of possessions and locating trails for the Sons of the second and third and fourth ranks to follow. The second rank Sons receive the title of Diviner or Trapper, and are taught how to perceive possession in humans, how to lay blessings on the hunting equipment of the Sons, and how to set traps for ghosts. The third rank Sons are part of a special operations group known as the Eye of Tertullian. These serve as lures for ghosts and mentors to Sons in waiting. The fourth rank return to the Holy Army as Avengers and may freely engage and destroy such ghosts as they are assigned to. They also serve as mentors to Sons of the first rank. The fifth rank is the highest held by Sons who still work in the field. These receive the title of Exorcist, and, as their name suggests, they perform rites on the victims of possession by demons using the secret rite of high exorcism. The sixth rank, the Scholars, perform research and develop theories on ghosts in the underworld. More practically, they serve as the quartermasters of the Sons, creating and distributing artifacts for use by the lower ranks. The seventh rank, the highest in the Sons of Tertullian, is of Preceptor. The Preceptors are collectively known as the Host. They set policy for the Sons, settle disputes between the lower ranks, and carry out secret missions assigned to them by the leader of the organization, known only as the Host of Hosts. The Host of Hosts will not meet with anyone below the rank of Preceptor, and even then, usually only with the eldest among the host. The primary tools of the Sons of Tertullian are their mastery of rituals and their true faith. Included in these rituals are the ability to bind ghosts, to ward areas against ghostly intrusion, or to expel ghosts from a particular place. With respect to true faith, the Sons often use holy symbols imbued with true faith to attack or defend against ghosts. They also use holy water, applied to their eyelids, to peer across the shroud into the Shadowlands, or as a weapon against ghosts. Two other tools in the Sun's arsenal are a ritual known as the Descent into Hell. The Sun enacting the ritual spends 3 days and nights fasting and praying. Then his allies may contribute some of their skills or attributes to the purified supplicant. The other ritual is the curiously named Healing Touch, usually performed on a victim prior to their exorcism. The Sons wash and shave the victim, then cut away a small piece of the victim's scalp. After mixing the scalp with a variety of other ingredients to form a salve, the Sun blesses it and applies it to their fingers. So long as the Sun's fingers stay in contact with the victim, any spirit possessing the victim is easier to exorcise. If the Sons of Tertullian are radical, then the sect of St. James, a sect within the Sons, are outright fanatical and dangerously blasphemous. Motivated by a handful of passages from a Gnostic gospel of dubious authenticity, the sect of St. James commits ritual suicides and enters the underworld as wraiths to destroy as many ghosts as possible before being destroyed themselves. The sect never number more than 99 living members at any time. The sect then splits itself into cohorts of 4 to 8 members, known as crosses. These crosses then undertake a year of grueling training and ritual preparation for their suicide. This preparation includes the creation of a weapon called a Sword of St. James, though it may be any kind of edged weapon. A Sword of St. James is a powerful artifact, spiritually attuned to its wielder, and can only be handled with any degree of mastery by its creator. When the time comes, the Cross's members ritually bind their souls to one another, along with their respective swords. They all slay themselves with their own weapons, which cross over with them as relics. Unhindered by the call that usually binds wraiths upon their death, the crosses proceed to destroy any wraiths they encounter, with the promise that death, in their crusade, guarantees them entrance into heaven, like the Crusaders of old. The Benandanti originated from a large family of Italian gypsies, or Romani, known as the Maldonati. Some folklore surrounds the phenomenon of babies born with a caul, or still within the amniotic sac. A caul birth was variously regarded as a sign of good luck or great destiny, or the child being born with some sensitivity to the spiritual world. The Maldonati discovered that the caul could be used to attain greater spiritual power than the poultices and good luck talismans that old women sold them for in the markets. The Maldonati claimed for themselves the title of Padroni dell'Amnio, Masters of the Caul, and offered to unhood and teach anyone, Romani or outsider, for a price how to use their powers. This price gradually grew steeper until the Maldonati apprentices were reduced to little better than slaves to the Padroni. In the 13th century, several apprentices, led by a man named Paolo, rejected the Maldonati and fled into the Alps of Lombardy in northern Italy, and hid themselves among the peasants. Paolo's apprentices, united only by the caul, came to be known as the Benandanti, the Good Walkers. They used their powers to benefit the people they lived among, protecting their crops and driving off malicious spirits. The Maldonati were incensed by this perceived betrayal and went hunting for the Benandanti. To evade their pursuers, the Benandanti would spread rumors of the Maldonati as stregoni, or evil witches. The conflict between the Benandanti and the Maldonati has occasionally been called the night battles by the peasants of Italy. By the 16th century, the night battles drew the attention of the Papal Inquisition. Eventually, the perception of the Benandanti changed. The Inquisition accused them of the misdeeds of the Maldonati, along with a few spicier accusations of being devil worshippers and deviants. The Benandanti were forced underground, but managed to escape the fate of less fortunate folk religions that drew the Inquisition's ire. In modern nights, the Benandanti are often solitary wanderers, meeting infrequently with one another and doing such works as their own consciences move them. The Benandanti differ as to how to deal with the restless dead. One group, the Donati, regard wraiths as evil spirits who must be destroyed, both for their own good and for the good of the living. The Redemptori believe that wraiths are just lost souls who should be encouraged to depart the underworld and move on beyond undeath. A Benandanti can literally be born into the tradition, emerging into the world with their call. Another Benandanti, usually a relative, will perform a ritual called the unhooding on the newborn, removing and preserving the call. The elder Benandanti performing the unhooding is called a sapienza, or wisdom, and acts as a kind of protector and mentor to the new Benandanti until they reach the age of 20, when the youngster becomes known as a novicio, or novice. A Benandanti may use his call to peer into the Shadowlands. By placing it over his eyes, he can see across the shroud as far as his normal range of vision and any spectral activity taking place in the vicinity. But a Benandanti may do more than just peek into the underworld. By falling into a trance called ecstasis, the Benandanti may enter the underworld, using his call as a focus. The Benandanti may only do so from dusk until dawn. If the Benandanti is caught in the underworld when the sun rises, he must find some other way to penetrate the shroud and return to his comatose body, which might take days, weeks, months, or even years. If a Benandanti's call is destroyed while he is in the underworld, he may never return to the lands of the living. But a benefit of ecstasis is that for every hour the Benandanti spends in the underworld, they require 2 less hours of sleep. So, 4 hours in ecstasis is as good as a full night's rest. But a Benandanti's strongest weapon is the Fennel Sword. This sword exists both in the Skinlands and the Shadowlands. The sword is forged while the Benandanti is in ecstasis, using specially grown fennel seeds and under the guidance of a guardian spirit. The spirit leads the Benandanti to a soul forge over a Nile and interrogates the sword seeker. If the sword seeker answers correctly, the guide provides the sword seeker with ferro spettrale, or spirit iron, and a barrel fire with which to craft the blade, along with the specially grown fennel. Finally, the sword is cooled in the abyssal chill of a Nile and given a secret name that powers it. But the process is not yet finished. The Benandanti must return to the world of the living to craft the spirit sword's counterpart and complete the powerful talisman weapon. A fennel sword can do catastrophic damage to a specter and wraiths with high angst. The sword can also be used to exorcise a mortal being skin-ridden by a specter. However, the sword requires maintenance in the form of being dipped in a Nile every new moon to refresh its power, or the Benandanti must go through the process of forging a new fennel sword. However, the greatest drawback of the fennel sword is its name, which is bound to the Benandanti. Discovery of the sword's name can allow specters to possess the Benandanti, or even pull him across the shroud and into the tempest. The Orphic Circle takes its name from Orpheus, the hero who descended into the underworld and returned with what the Circle considers to be the secrets of true immortality. What separates the Orphic Circle from other factions of ghost hunters is that several of its highest-ranking members are also members of other supernatural factions, ranging from Clan Giovanni, to the Arcanum, to the Benandanti, to the Euthanatos, and even the Void Seekers of the Technocracy. And the Orphics rarely know the truth about one another. In fact, most of its mortal members are blissfully unaware that vampires and mages walk among them. In fact, the Orphic Circle was founded under the influence of a vampire, specifically a death-obsessed vampire from Asia Minor, acting at the behest of his master, who foresaw the need of such a cult when he experienced his final death. When his master did die and crossed over to the underworld as a wraith, he used the cult to carry out his plans of returning from death, like the mythic Orpheus. Let's see, vampire, alive in ancient Greece, death-obsessed, based in Asia Minor or Anatolia, which contains an out-of-the-way region known as Cappadocia, and anticipated his own death. I wonder who this master vampire might be. Now, I'm not saying it was Cappadocius, but the evidence kind of points in that general direction. Anyway, the dead vampire lord of the Orphic Circle, over time, became shadow-eaten, paying ever more heed to the seductive whispers of oblivion, but was eventually overthrown by an even more powerful creature of the underworld, who then used the circle as its cat's paw on earth. Or, to put it simply, the Orphic Circle served the Malfians, the godlike specters of the labyrinth, who sought to plunge all things into oblivion. The express purpose of the Orphic Circle, to its members, was to determine the truth of life, death, and immortality. As such, the Circle was more knowingly involved in the affairs and politics of the underworld than any other group of mortals on Earth. The various wraiths of the hierarchy, renegade and heretic factions knew or had heard of the Orphic Circle and sought them out in order to influence the mortal world to their benefit. Aside from politics and scholarship, there was a dark mystery cult at the heart of the Orphic Circle, ruled over by a priesthood called the Ebon Bench. The cult venerated the god Euboleus, occasionally known as Dionysius, a god of wine, pleasure, and immortality, lord of the underworld, and in the time to come, the lord of all things. The Circle believed that if they did not enjoy life as Euboleus directed, then they did not deserve to enjoy death. Hence, the orgiastic rituals carried out at various times of the year. But how did one join the Orphic Circle? Simply put, you did not find them. They found you. Membership was limited to 300 total around the world, with 10 members set aside, known as Kerberos, appointed every 3 years as a watchdog committee to recruit and evaluate potential members. When one of the seats became available, usually upon the death of the prior member, Kerberos recruited a new Orphic to replace them in the outer circle. Out of thousands of potential candidates from around the world, the Orphic Circle chose people of high talent but low notoriety, as the work of the Circle was such that scrutiny would not be helpful. An offer was extended to join the Orphic Circle, but was not to be refused, for such refusal usually resulted in the death of that person in order to protect the Circle's secrecy. Once the candidate accepted, they were administered with the Oath of Secrecy, a mystic binding to the Ebon Bench that compelled not only secrecy from the member, but also bound every member of the Orphic Circle to confess any betrayal of the organization or revelation of its secrets. Joining the Orphic Circle was one thing, but to penetrate the upper echelon, the inner circle, or the Ebon Bench, required ruthless politicking and immense wealth. Members of the Ebon Bench had to win their seats by election from votes of the entire Orphic Circle, and usually only with the support of one of the two major factions, the Orgiofantes, who controlled the Ebon Bench for 1100 years and supported maintaining the organization's course for that time. The other, the Decaya, an all-female party, worshipped the goddess Decay and desired to change, or rather revert, the Circle to a more ancient and even violent path, which also excluded men from the Ebon Bench. The headquarters of the Orphic Circle was a remote Greek villa tucked away in the Pindus Mountains and accessible only by helicopter or by foot through heavy woods and uphill. The name of the sprawling 1,020-acre estate was Taenarus, the gate of the underworld in the legend of Orpheus. The endgame of the Orphic Circle was a subject of rampant speculation among those outside of the Ebon Bench. But the most credible rumors said that the Circle would, at the turn of the millennium, destroy the Shroud and bring about the reign of Euboleus, and they would serve as his immortal high priests. In 2000, the Orphic Circle got a little taste of what the world would look like without the Shroud. All 300 members of the Orphic Circle, along with a handful of uninvited onlookers, arrived at the Circle's Greek headquarters, Taenarus, to participate in the ritual that would bring down the Shroud and join them with their master. They succeeded, in part. The Shroud near Taenarus was torn asunder, and the Orphics suddenly found themselves in the middle of a great battle between two armies of specters, serving two different Malfians. The Ebon Bench was destroyed almost instantly, and those Orphics who weren't killed outright were possessed by specters, some of whom still walk the earth even today, with all of the knowledge, wealth, and influence of their mortal host, eager to finish what the Orphic Circle began at Tanarus. Some actively seek out the dead. Others are born with the ability to do so. These gifted, or in some cases cursed humans, have a variety of names. The most common in the world of darkness for them is mediums. They possess some degree of psychic ability to communicate with the Restless Dead, whether willingly or not. One group of mediums, the Daughters of Creusa, were the result of the fanaticism of the Sons of Tertullian, which regards mediums as either unfortunate victims of possession or, less favorably, as willing pawns of Satan. The Daughters of Creusa originated in Greece in 1740, after the bodies of 3 women were discovered dumped in a stream by the woods. The only link between the 3 was that they were all sophistas, channelers, mediums for nearby villages. The 3 dead sophistas were only the latest victims in a trend that had taken place for nearly a decade in Greece. Finally, other sophistas gathered to locate and punish whoever was behind these murders. The group of female mediums took their name, the Daughters of Creusa, from the wife of the Trojan hero Aeneas, who had been killed in the sack of the city of Troy by the Greeks. She returned from the underworld to warn her husband to escape from Hesperia, but when he tried to embrace her, she disappeared forever. The Daughters of Creusa took up the mantle of avengers of the murdered dead. By 1802, the group had discovered the name of those who had murdered their fellow mediums, the Sons of Tertullian. Initially, the Daughters of Creusa pledged to eradicate the Sons of Tertullian, but the sons were not only more numerous, but more wealthy, influential, and better informed, thanks to their affiliation with the Society of Leopold. Nevertheless, the daughters spread out of Greece and into the Balkans, Persia, Russia, and Western Europe, following in the path of the Sons of Tertullian as they hunted for the so-called possessed. The daughters recruited more female mediums who honored the dead and practiced ancestor worship. Eventually, the daughters made allies among the Restless Dead, and they came to mutually beneficial agreements between them. Every so often, a son of Tertullian fell into the hands of the Daughters of Creusa, and was judged according to their actions. In the modern nights, the Daughters of Creusa are largely an information network, including both living and dead agents. In addition to psychic power, the daughters have obtained temporal resources, including financial, legal, and political allies. The Daughters of Creusa still take up the mantle of protectors of the innocent and avengers of those whose crimes go unpunished or undiscovered. All of the Daughters of Creusa are women. While it is not expressly forbidden, no man has ever been sponsored for membership. Candidates are recruited on the basis of psychic capability and trustworthiness. This trustworthiness is assessed by one of the daughters' ghostly allies, who possesses the arcanoi of fatalism. The prospective daughter is assigned to guard a fetter for the wraith in question, who then reads the fate and character of the candidate. If the oracle wraith vouches for her, then she is accepted, though that same wraith can revoke the reading at any time. The daughters are organized, much like wraiths, in circles, led by a sophista, whose powers are limited to adjudicating disputes, setting very general investigative policy, and either bailing out or protecting daughters who find themselves afoul of the law. Each circle maintains 2 places of refuge, a primary meeting place that is discreet, and a secret place in case the first is compromised. The daughters' main goal remains to neutralize the Sons of Tertullian. When one of the sons falls into their hands, they rarely kill them. Instead, they give the son a sharp lesson, based on their actions, which usually include subjecting the son to some of the order's own methods of quote-unquote exorcism. If the son was indirectly involved in the death of one of the daughters, they mark him for haunting by their wraith allies. But if the son was directly responsible, then he was executed, after being forced to relive his victim's death through her eyes for a full week. The Wraiths who assisted the daughters in their investigations and punishments were typically renegades working for quid pro quo. These renegade Wraiths tried to steer the daughters towards believing that the Sons of Tertullian were allies of the hierarchy. However, the daughters were not well versed in the politics of the underworld, so this association, in addition to being false, was largely meaningless to the daughters. But the daughters did know that specters existed, and that the servants of Oblivion, wherever they were found, had to be put down as hard and fast as possible. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Spiritism was a popular hobby of the well-to-do. Many people, some credible but most not, earned a decent living by acting as mediums, holding seances, and claiming to have the ability to summon and speak on behalf of the Restless Dead. In the mid-19th century, a group of spiritists, the Seven Sisters, was created from a set of true mediums. Their story begins with four sisters whose mother bore a set of triplets but died during childbirth. Their eldest sister, Gwen Jones, discovered that she could hear the voice of her mother, who lingered in the Shadowlands to be close to her youngest daughters. Gwen encouraged her other sisters to not only speak with their mother, but to eventually learn to speak with other ghosts. But the sisters suffered a series of tragedies. The triplets eventually fell into comas, their uncle committed suicide, and their aunt abandoned them. But Gwen moved the sisters to Philadelphia, where they all began working as mediums for hire. In 1848, they became famous to their clientele, which included politicians and European nobility. The sisters found that the ability to speak with the dead was far less profitable than the ability to subtly influence the course of nations. But as their predictions came to pass, their fortunes and prestige grew. This led the sisters to becoming well known in the proper circles as the advisors and occasionally makers of kings. Gwen, acting on behalf of her younger sisters, created an organization, the Seven Sisters, formally in 1911, as a society dedicated to cultivating the reputation of mediumship in political circles. When the last of the Seven Sisters died in 1920, at the age of 92, her estate was calculated to be worth $2 million, which would be approximately $25 million in the year 2020. The Seven Sisters still exist as a private organization of high society women with the actual power of channeling wraiths, occasionally opening themselves to certain ghosts who possess the arcanoi of puppetry. The Seven Sisters is headquartered in Washington, D.C., in an office of the Municipal Library. The society is largely reliant on client donations and membership dues for funding. The Sisters is fiercely protective of its reputation, which it secures by remaining on guard against fraudulent readings, and by maintaining a collection of letters of reference from important and satisfied customers. As mentioned before, every member of the Seven Sisters is a medium, primarily dealing with predictions. Additionally, a potential sister must demonstrate at least some aptitude for politics and government, otherwise they are of no use to the sisters' clientele. If an applicant passes both tests, they are placed on probation and assigned to a tutor for training. This tutorship includes how to hold seances and counsel important politicians and corporate leaders. After 6 months, the trainee is taken to a black tie function where she puts her skills to use in how to cultivate prospective clients. If all goes well, she is taken off of probation and assigned to a location or political group to work with, and 30% of her first year's earnings are paid to her tutor. Sisters are required to return to Washington, if they aren't already there, for an annual interview with the Executive Council. Once a sister has worked for 7 years, she may become a tutor in her own right. After 10 years of service, a sister is eligible for election to the Executive Council, an unpaid but prestigious office that handles most of the administrative work of the entire society. After 10 years on the Executive Council, a sister may become a political liaison, trusted to broker agreements between the important clients and the most powerful wraiths, while maintaining the confidences of both. Agatha Cabot was widowed in 1879 when her husband, Beauregard, and their child died in a carriage accident. This left Agatha a very wealthy but lonely woman. In her desperation, she sought out contact with her departed husband and child, leading her through a string of fraudulent mediums, including one named Hannah Ross, who convinced the widow that she had shown her the face of her dead son through a curtain, and that another such contact would require the widow to hand over a sizable sum of her fortune. Like any good drug pusher, the first taste is always free. But when Agatha returned home that very night, she was visited by her dead husband, who had learned the arcanoi of embody, and appeared before her in more or less solid form. Following an appropriately tearful reunion, Beauregard apologized to his wife for allowing her to search for him for so long when he could have contacted her, even without embody. Agatha wanted to know everything. What was it like to be dead, and why had he not come to her sooner? That night, the Cabots had a long discussion about the underworld, the dictum mortem, the law of the dead, and Emperor Charon's decree that the dead have no contact with the living. When day came and Beauregard's spirit faded away with the dawn, Agatha's sorrow was replaced by sympathy for the plight of the dead, who existed under Charon's tyranny. She also possessed the quiet, dignified fury of a patrician woman who had been taken advantage of by charlatans, especially Hannah Ross. She was able to persuade her fellow ladies of leisure to the rightness of her cause, and soon the Agathan Society, named over her protests of modesty, was created to expose false mediums. Their first target, Hannah Ross, was exposed and driven from Boston in 1887. Agatha Cabot then urged the Society to do charity for the destitute wraiths her husband described existing in squalor in Stygia. They took steps to locate and protect the fetters of wraiths and help them resolve their passions, so long as those passions were proper. Their communications were mainly between Beauregard through his wife. Knowledge of wraiths and membership in the Society passed from mother to daughter, as sons were excluded from membership. Agatha Cabot died peacefully in her sleep in 1947. Beauregard Cabot appeared to the entire Society and informed them that Agatha had gone to heaven, or transcended, immediately upon her death. He thanked the ladies of the Society for their kindness, not just to him, but to all the wraiths they had aided over the decades. He then asked them to continue to comfort the restless dead. The Agathan Society continues into the current nights, meeting on Tuesday for supper at the Cabot House on Beacon Street. Beauregard Cabot occasionally appears to them, or one of his dead associates, and presents the case of some unfortunate wraith whose living fetters are destitute or ill, or whose haunt is about to be destroyed. The ladies of the Society then discuss which cases they can most effectively and appropriately render aid to. Haunts have been purchased, fetters have been collected for safekeeping, and living relatives have received generosity from a number of charitable organizations in which the Agathan Society has influence. The Society has managed to acquire a number of properties in the Boston area, some of which are the most psychically active locations in the city. Due to their work, the ladies of the Society have a number of allies in the underworld, some of which are unknown to them. But it would be a mistake to think that the Agathan Society are a knitting circle of doddering old matrons, or that they are bleeding hearts. High society in Boston is cutthroat, and the 9 current members of the Agathan Society are wealthy, shrewd, and when needs be, merciless. A few possess enough occult knowledge to be able to ward themselves in their homes against spectral misbehavior. But the advocate for their dead and living unfortunates is not what he appears. Mr. Beauregard Cabot is a romantic, chivalrous Victorian gentleman, a relic of a bygone age. But he is also a dyed-in-the-wool renegade, dedicated to breaking the control of the hierarchy over the underworld and improving the conditions of all wraiths. The Society does indeed help wraiths, but only those wraiths whose help would benefit Beauregard's cause. To that end, several of the Society's haunted properties served as bases for the renegades against the Boston necropolis, and several of the fetters the Society has collected belong to Beauregard's allies, or in some cases, his enemies. While Mr. Cabot never has and never would destroy another wraith's fetters, The fear alone is enough to compel some wraiths to cooperate with him. The Anacreons, the leaders of the Stygian legions of the Boston necropolis, have noticed the Agathan Society's activities on the behalf of Beauregard Cabot and the Renegades, and is seriously considering taking action against the Society, if for no other reason than to deprive the Renegades of an important resource. The hunt for the Restless Dead extends beyond the realms of religion or ritual. Men and women of scientific bent have witnessed the doings of wraiths and could not dismiss their observations as legerdemain or tricks of light and sound. In 1882, a group of English and American scientists and thinkers created the Society for Psychical Research, or SPR. They sought to apply a rationalist and scientific approach to spiritism, and in doing so, lend respectability to the observation of paranormal phenomena. In the early 1900s, the SPR splintered into two groups. The split was not acrimonious in any way. It was a division between colleagues whose focused research had branched off from one another to the point that it was no longer conducive to be housed in the same body. These two groups were the Center for Parapsychological Research and the College of Psychic Learning. The Center for Parapsychological Research, or CPR, was based primarily in Trinity College, Cambridge University, but its members were spread far and wide throughout European and American academia. The CPR specialized in two categories of parapsychology: extrasensory perception and psychokinesis. While their search technically was not for wraiths, they have made contact with wraiths when dealing with those who possess parapsychological abilities. Their main interest in wraiths is wraiths' ability to psychokinetically move objects, though if the full spectrum of wraiths' potential were known, it would draw far more of the CPR's attention. Membership in the CPR is open to anyone who pays their $50 annual membership dues. In addition to membership and a discount on registration for their annual conference, members also get a subscription to the Journal of Parapsychological Studies, a group insurance plan, and a job placement service. By contrast, the other body created by the SPR split, the College of Psychic Learning, was, ostensibly, dedicated to the teaching of how to utilize various psychic abilities for the cost of tuition. Most of the college's coursework was nonsense, but there was just enough truth at its core to be dangerous, both to ghosts and to the students. The majority of the student body were women in their late 30s and early 40s, and the teaching staff were also primarily women as well. Despite casual dismissal by their counterparts at CPR, the CPL has an unusually high success rate in assisting police and sheriff's departments in criminal investigations near its 180-acre campus in Moundville, Alabama, resulting in a number of police-sponsored scholarships and work-study opportunities. The CPL has around 50 students at any time, and its students are pushed towards interdisciplinary study. The CPL has a number of departments within the college, including the Department of Extraphysical Experiences, which practices astral and dream travel, the Department of Psychokinesis, the Telepathy Department, the Department of Clairvoyance and Dowsing, the Department of Oral and Carillion Study, the Department of Alternative Consciousness, the Feng Shui Study Group, and the Department of Psychical Ethics. The Alternate Energy Group was formed by a team of scientists and energy experts with the goal of discovering a new source of renewable energy to replace fossil fuels. A division of the AEG was the Paranormal Research Wing, a faction of more radical scientists from the University of California, Berkeley, the University of Edinburgh, and Duke University, focused on the use of psychic and ectoplasmic energies as a possible renewable energy source. The PRW managed to secure backing from several multinational corporations and other private donors. The primary goal of the PRW was the conversion of ectoplasm into energy on an industrial scale. They succeeded, on a minor scale, using a device called an Ectoplasmic Converter Engine, or ECE. The device was designed by a Duke graduate student named Ruby Mather in the mid-1980s, and constructed when she was hired by the PRW. The ECE can trap and destroy wraiths, converting their plasm into a stable form of energy. However, the PRW never quite figured out how to harness the energy for commercial use. The scientists involved did not know that wraiths were the souls of the dead. Their theory was that wraiths were high-frequency psychic resonances of the consciousnesses of the dead. Or, put another way, clouds of energy mimicking the identities of the living. Though this was not a universally held theory, and not all supported ECE research. The fortunes of the PRW changed, quite literally, in 1996, with the death of eccentric billionaire Jonas Cornell Pinch. Pinch met a scientist of the AEG named Damson Ernest Goodavage, an expert in the obscure field of chaos sciences. A waiter mistakenly seated Pinch at Goodavage's table while Pinch was in Geneva, Switzerland for the annual AEG shareholders meeting. The two Americans laughed off the error and began talk which veered into Dr. Goodavage's prototype for a device based on the ECE that he called the Stochastical Extrusion Engine, or SEE. Dr. Goodavage planned to use the device to photograph the human soul. When Pinch asked him what sent him on that trail, Goodavage disclosed that he heard the voice of his mother, who died when he was 9, speaking through the body of his father, who developed Alzheimer's disease 5 years before. Goodavage's mother, through his father's body, told him about the afterlife. Pinch questioned Dr. Goodavage, and they agreed to meet again in the United States. However, that never happened. But J.C. Pinch did will $7 billion of his fortune into the Pinch Trust for the benefit of the PRW. Executive Director Burt McTavish announced the trust at the PRW's annual meeting that same year. One of the conditions of the trust was the cessation of all work on the ECE. Dr. Mather was promoted to Director of Research and Development, but effectively, she was forced into a kind of working retirement. The Pinch Trust paid for the construction of the facility at Quarry Gap, 10 miles east of Rutland, Vermont, a sprawling postmodern research campus built atop and into a mountain, specifically to house the SEE. The Pinch Trust also allowed the PRW to open the checkbook and steal away some of the best and brightest scientists who would have otherwise been hired by the technocracy. This piqued the technocracy's curiosity. Construction on the Stochastical Extrusion Engine, nicknamed the Chaos Scope by some of the scientists, was completed in 1997. Chaos Scopes were also brought online in 1998 at 2 remote PRW facilities at Berkeley, California and Edinburgh, Scotland. That same year, the PRW's work came to, or rather was brought to, the attention of the National Security Agency, or NSA. The NSA poured even more billions into the Chaos Scope project to miniaturize it and deploy it throughout the DC metro area in a clandestine hunt for what it considered to be transdimensional entities or blank bodies. Unfortunately, chaoscopic technology has one teensy tiny, minute, hardly worth discussing side effect. Every chaoscope weakens the shroud considerably where they are used. In other words, a normally ghost-free location, like a science lab, will, given enough time, turn into a veritable haunt with wraiths, and possibly worse things, being able to enter the lands of the living. In 1992, 5 MIT computer science students held a seance in their dorm when a blonde woman appeared on the screensavers of one of their computers. She told them that she had been murdered and that her body could be found in one of the steam tunnels underneath the school. More importantly, she wanted revenge for her murder. The obviously terrified students did the scientific thing and double-checked their equipment to make sure that no one was playing a prank on them. At 3 a.m., they descended down into the tunnels to search. As they had been told, they found a woman's body, but she was brunette, not blonde, and had signs that she had been strangled. The police initially suspected the students, but soon discovered the real murderer, who confessed. After several months of experimentation, the students came to the conclusion that spirits of the dead could, under the right circumstances, interact with electrons and possess machines. They took their theory to Professor McKay, an electrical engineering instructor who was secretly a member of the Arcanum. Without disclosing his membership in the organization, Professor McKay told them that he knew how to summon and bind ghosts safely, and set up the experiment for them using an old pinball machine. The wraith that they trapped in the pinball machine went wild. Lights flashed on the boards and flippers beat furiously on their own. The students were thrilled at this and asked Professor McKay to join them in conducting experiments with the dead. But the professor declined, on account of being too old to provoke the wrath of the living dead. He did give them his blueprints on how to summon and trap wraiths in various machines and objects. Since then, the Pinball Wizards, as they named their little group, succeeded in trapping wraiths in a variety of electric objects, including a car, an electric toothbrush, and a massager. The wraiths that they tricked are, of course, furious, but the students were too excited to stop, and regarded the wraiths as rather stupid in the first place. The Pinball Wizards were not malicious, so much as they were just a bunch of selfish nerds too excited about pushing the limits of their latest discovery to consider the possible ramifications of their actions. Aside from a number of noise complaints, the Pinball Wizards did not suffer any repercussions for their nocturnal projects. The current status of the Pinball Wizards is unknown. Whether they continued their supernatural project post-graduation or handed it off to a new generation of ghost hunters is just another mystery in the world of darkness. And those were some of the ghost hunters of Wraith the Oblivion. Personally, I like my human ghost stories more along the lines of The Conjuring or the Amityville Horror than Ghostbusters, though Ghostbusters is a great movie on its own. I think ghosts should create tension. They should present a ever-present but unseen threat. The ghost hunter should be diligent to the point of paranoia about either sleeping while it's daytime or performing warding rituals over where they live and sleep. And even when you have professional ghost hunters, they should be worried about what happens if their tools, whether those tools are talismans, rituals, or even a scientific ghost trap, fails. Anyway, that's all I have for now. Until next time.